Mic check 1 2. It's the Y2K collector, and it feels like at this point in Sony's history, the PlayStation 3 is kind of like the forgotten stepchild. Everyone loves the PlayStation 1 because obviously it's the first PlayStation. It's the most retro console that Sony has produced because it obviously it's the first. And so everyone's going to have that special place in their heart for the first PlayStation 1. And then you have the PlayStation 2, which is arguably the greatest console of all time, with arguably the greatest library of all time. And so the PlayStation 2 for many will always reign supreme, no matter how many PlayStations Sony comes out with. Even when we're looking at the PlayStation 7 and the PlayStation 9 and the PlayStation 12, people will still harken back to the PlayStation 2 as one of the most innovative generations in Sony's existence, right? When it comes to consoles and the games that were created on that platform. And then you have the PlayStation 4, which I think a lot of people are still endeared to because while, yes, it's a generation behind, it's still recent enough for people to continue collecting for it, for people to continue buying for it. Many people are still playing it. And, you know, for many of those who just either can't afford a PlayStation 5 or just don't see the value, they're still playing the PlayStation 4. And then you have the PlayStation 5, which just has a ton of hype around it, considering the new PlayStation 5 Pro. It is just the most recent console. And, you know, there's a lot of attention on it. So where does this leave the PlayStation 3? And I think it kind of leaves it in this forgotten stepchild position. But I think that a couple years from now, we're going to be looking back on the PlayStation 3, kicking ourselves like, man, we should have been paying more attention to this library, because I picked up a copy of Saw 2 yesterday on the PlayStation 3, traded for it. I didn't realize that this game had, shot up to over $100. But there are a lot of games on the PlayStation 3 library that have shot up over $100. And not only that, there's a lot of titles on the PlayStation 3 that you can get for cheap that are amazing titles that will give you a lot of fun. We already know the expensive games: Saw, The Wolverine, Web of Shadows, Shattered Dimensions, Armored Core, The Godfather. We already know those ones, right? Those are the obvious. But then you got games like God of War Ascension. You have the Sonic the Ultimate Genesis Collection, which this is actually a great game, a great way to play Sonic games. Like if you didn't get the Genesis Mini or the Genesis Mini 2, this is another great way for you to experience some of those great Sonic games that maybe you've never played before. Over 50 titles, I think, 50 titles on this one. A great game. Silent Hill Downpour, another awesome title. The Hulk, right? Just some great titles. Alice Madness Returns. And I know some of these are on the 360, but I mean, I think people are just really genuinely sleeping on the PlayStation 3 and just what's in this library. There's just a ton of games that you can get now for the cheap while they are cheap. Obviously, because the 360 and the PlayStation 3 are in the same generation, they're going to share a lot of the same library, right? But what I've come to notice and realize is that a lot of the same games that are on, like, let's say the PlayStation 3 that are on the 360, a lot of times they're more valuable on the PlayStation 3. Why that is, I don't know. I genuinely don't know. Even with the Xbox massive run up over this past summer, and just the crazy Xbox tax that we saw on all Xbox 360 games due to the store shutting down, we're still seeing where PlayStation 3 games in certain cases are outpacing the Xbox 360 when it comes to values. And so, I don't know. I just feel like at this stage of the game, the PlayStation 3 is kind of falling into that forgotten stepchild position in Sony's lineup. And I think it's just one of those systems that a lot of people are just kind of like overlooking. Either they're going heavy on the retro and they're collecting for PlayStation 1 and PlayStation 2, or they're thoroughly enjoying their PlayStation 4s, or they're just looking forward to the next gen console and they're really just concentrating on PlayStation 5. But I feel like PlayStation 3, in the midst of all this madness, in the midst of all this hoopla, is somewhat lost in the sauce. Now, the good thing is that, I mean, PlayStation 3 games are still easy to find at most game stores, whether it's your mom and pop shop. I don't think that the PlayStation 3, I don't think that when most retailers and even like thrift stores, I think thrift stores, mom and pop shops are hip to the fact that PS2 and PS1 games are retro. So they're keeping an eye out for that. I don't think that they're really hip to the valuable PlayStation 4 games. I don't think most mom and pop shops are hip to that. Um, and I think that they're still not hip to the PS3 like valuable titles either, because I'll still run into valuable PS3 games at like the thrift store, and you could tell because they didn't recognize what it was, they're pricing them at like $3 and $4. And even GameStop will make a mistake here and there. They'll price Killer is Dead for $9.99, or they'll price, you know, certain games really underpriced because they're not looking at the PS3 as being that retro to where they need to keep an eye out for maybe a hidden gem or a valuable title that, they should up the price on. So I think like it truly is that sweet spot for the PS3. I know a lot of people are saying that now is the time to go after PlayStation 4 with PlayStation 5 taking over, but I think there are still a ton of eyes on PlayStation 4. A lot of people are still looking at it. And the PlayStation 3 is kind of like under the radar, especially when it comes to those games that people just aren't expecting to be priced high. And I give it maybe another year or two. Once the PlayStation 3 starts to really fall into that category that the PlayStation 2 is in now, where it's truly looked at as a retro console, it's so far removed from the PS4 and PS5 era that people have to truly designate it as a retro console and a retro generation. I think that's when you're going to start to see these prices start to shift a little bit more. I think for the most part, though, we still kind of see Xbox 360 and PS3 as more modern consoles than we do retro consoles. Even though GameStop has designated them as retro consoles, I think in the minds of most gamers and most collectors, we don't genuinely look at those consoles as retro yet. And it could be strict purely because of the graphics. And I don't want to start to open up that whole the conversation of graphics again. But if you put in a PS3 game, like if I have Sleeping Dogs on PlayStation 3 and PlayStation 4, and if I play both of them right now, I'm really not going to feel much of a difference between the PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation 4. Maybe better frame rate, maybe better loading times, but in terms of playing the actual game, it's not going to be much of a difference. So I think in the minds of gamers and collectors, there's not much of a differentiator between the PS3 and PS4 generation for us to really genuinely look at it as a retro console. And to be quite honest, I don't know if we ever will, just because of how close the graphics are. Even though there was a huge leap between the PS1 and PS2 in terms of graphics, there was still a good enough leap between the PS2 and PS3 for us to feel that separation from a gameplay and graphics standpoint between the PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation 2 generations. I could be wrong about all of this. These are just my opinions, just based on what I see when I play video games, how I interpret graphics and graphical fidelity. But you guys can let me know what you think down in the comments. Do you think the PlayStation 3 is the stepchild of Sony? And if so, why? And also, what are some titles on the PlayStation 3 that collectors should be looking out for? Because I've really gotten into my PlayStation 3 bag this year, and I think I'm going to continue. Yes, I've done a lot with the 360, but I'm really looking at the PlayStation 3, and a big part of me does want to find a backwards compatible PlayStation 3. I've always wanted to add one of those consoles into my collection. I've just never found one at the price point that I felt was worth paying. Don't know if I ever will find one at that price point, but we'll see what happens. But that does it for now. It's the Y2K Collector. I'm just cleaning up a bunch of stuff. It's been a crazy week, crazy weekend. So many games came in, and I really am having to put together a trade/sales bin. I've got a box of games that I'm starting over there, a whole stack of games for sales and for trades that I'm putting together. Just got to weed out like the stuff that I really, really want to keep versus the stuff that I really want to get rid of, and the stuff that, matters the most. So just doing a little sorting. It's a mess. It's a disaster in here, but hopefully we can get it all cleaned up, and maybe I'll come back at you with a late night video tonight. But that does it for me. It's the Y2K Collector. Stay dry out there and take it easy.